All right, Gustavo, we are ready when you are. If you want to start the meeting now. Want to do the opening remarks?
Just give me a moment, Jenny.
Sure thing.
All right, we ready? Yes, good afternoon. Welcome to the afternoon workshop for the Central and South Florida Flood Resiliency Study on performance metrics. Happy to be this afternoon here with all of you. I would prefer this iteration in person, but so having this virtual iteration with the stakeholders and the public perspective will be great. I will always like to work with this team, have that interaction here from the people from South Florida and the counties that we are working with, and have that feedback from all of you, and provide also input from our team. We have a lot of expert and team members working on this study, and they were really enthusiastic about this work that we are doing in South Florida for this study. And we will expecting to have a great meeting this afternoon and tomorrow, and we will be engaging our team in other discussions in the future. And that being said, I have Jenny Smith, the project management from South Florida Water Management District. And I think I forgot to introduce myself, right? I'm Gustavo Suarez, with the planning technical lead for this study from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Apologies for that, Jenny.
Great. Thank you, Gustavo. Let's see. I can go over the agenda today. So I'm Jenny Smith. I'm the project manager for South Florida Water Management District. Just to go over a few housekeeping items. So this meeting is being recorded and it is going to be available on YouTube. This will be posted after the meeting on our public meeting website on the district, as well as the C&SF website, update website on the district website as well. If you do need to speak or ask a question or stop one of the presenters at any point, you can raise your hand and we can unmute you. But feel free if you have a very technical question to raise your hand during the chat. We do have several people monitoring this chat. So going over the agenda really quick. Today, we're going to present a summary of what has been done in the past in the October workshop. We have a summary of the discussion topics and what was decided upon. And our day 2 will be group discussions. So tomorrow will be a lot more interaction with breakout sessions. So you can really ask questions and talk to the experts that are doing the specific topics in this study. So quickly, here is our plan to start, immediately. We have 10 minutes here to go over some of these agenda items, and we will end at, or we'll have a break at 2:30. Let me see. And we will have a summary and end at 4:30. So if you have any questions during the presentation, just raise your hand. Quickly, day 2 will start at 8:30 tomorrow. So we're doing things in the afternoon today and morning tomorrow. And with that, I will let the PowerPoint commence.
Hey, thank you, Jenny, for your introduction and the agenda topics that we are going to discuss in the next 2 days. And we have leadership from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in the South Florida Water Management District. We will have our Chief of Plan Formulation Branch, Mrs. Stephanie Maris. After that, we have Eva Velez with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Chief of Ecosystem Restorations. And next, we have Dr. Ana Carolina Moran from the South Florida Water Management District, Chief of District Resiliency. And that being said, I'll leave you with Mrs. Stephanie Maris.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tiffany Mattis, currently serving as the Plan Formulation Chief here with the Jacksonville District. I'd like to welcome each of you to the Central and Southern Florida Flood Resiliency Study Workshop. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule today to participate in this interactive opportunity to develop and discuss performance metrics in support of this project. As Gustavo and Jenny have stated, we have 2 half-days set aside to focus on this highly vulnerable infrastructure in southern Palm Beach, Broward County, as well as Miami-Dade counties. A portion of the team's presentation will focus on the USAID Policy Directive for Comprehensive Benefits dated the 5th of January, 2021. That policy guidance emphasizes the framework that we are to use to evaluate total benefits for project alternatives, including equal consideration of economic, environmental, and social categories. That guidance also applies to the benefit cost analysis required to support our budgetary decision-making processes with the Corps. Toward the end of the day on tomorrow, we will take the information we've gathered from you, we'll share that information with all the participants, and highlight our next steps in the plan formulation process. So again, thank you for being a part of this workshop today, and we look forward to working with you throughout this process. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Sound check?
We hear you.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Thank you, Tiffany, for that wonderful opening. Thank you, Gustavo and Jenny. Welcome, everyone, to our C&SF Flood Resiliency Study Workshop. So today is another opportunity to provide specific input to our team, our joint team, that informs how we evaluate flood event modeling. This is especially important as it relates to how economic impacts within municipalities and critical infrastructure are impacted by flood events. And these details are best provided by those of you on the ground in these areas. So that's the main thing we want you to think about today and share with us. It's also an opportunity to begin thinking about how you, as a stakeholder, can help us evaluate the modeled flood data the team will provide next month. So thinking about what we're doing now and what the team has prepared for consideration, but also thinking about our next step. And so having your assessments based on local knowledge is key to our evaluation process. And with such a large geographic area with many municipalities, the focus that you can provide in your area is key for our team to capture the effects of these flood events. So that's my call to you. Thank you for joining, and I will turn it over to our illustrious Dr. Moran.
Thank you very much, Eva. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me well? Excellent.
Yeah.
Great. So again, welcome everyone. Thanks, Gustavo, Jenny, all the leads on making this meeting happen today. We are in a very important time as we advance this study. We asked for input from stakeholders about a few months ago, looking at how we want to evaluate the benefits of those projects that we're going to be, of this study, but I mean, related to the projects that we're going to be thinking and planning for this region. And today we really want to make progress on how we can measure those benefits. And that would, of course, certainly help us in determining how we we define those project alternatives. So we're excited to have this conversation with you all. We certainly need your input, and that's a critical time for you to provide input for us. You really guide us in how we are going to be measuring, again, project benefits. So we really appreciate your time. I want to share with you all also that we will definitely need creativity as we advance in determining those measures, the metrics, the way we're going to be measuring the benefits. Normally, and especially in a study like that is such for a large region, we need to understand that we don't have all those resources to be here studying this for many, many years. We want to be efficient in the way we perform this study. And to be efficient, we need to be able to find good data sources and define good metrics. So having your input today and helping us on finding data sources that we can use to advance those performance metrics is going to be very critical. And we really appreciate your attention and your time today. We have made significant progress since the time we met last time. We have run all those models for the entire project area. We're going to share on our upcoming meeting. And we really need what we're asking for you all today. We really need your input on helping us on how we can measure things here and how those relate to the objectives that we have for this study. So again, thank you for your time. Thank you for being with us this afternoon and tomorrow morning. It's again, we have been working very closely with the Corps, South Florida Water Management District, and the Corps on this study. We understand this is a critical study for our region, and we are committed to continue it and continue on the study plan that we have and get to project recommendations soon. So anyway, we hope you stay with us, stay engaged today, and on those following, I would say, at least for the next 2-3 months, that we're going to be developing a lot of those important analyses in this study, and we appreciate your input and your feedback at any time. So thank you, and I will turn back to you, Gustav. I think it's Tim.
And now we have this Tim Geisen, the project management, the Army Corps of Engineers.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. As Gustavo said, my name is Tim Geisen. I'm the project manager with the Corps of Engineers, and I want to do a kind of quick overview on the project, just as a refresher for those who have been part of it since the beginning, and for those who are fairly new, kind of give you a flavor of what we've been looking at, as well as kind of where we are and kind of next steps. So first of all, we'll take a look at the kind of project area and how we've divided that up into more, let's say, bite-sized pieces to be able to manage that from a modeling perspective and evaluation perspective. So we have 4 planning reaches which have been identified, which you can see on the screen, labeled A, B, C, and D, covering Broward and Hillsborough, Little River and the related basins, the Miami River and related basins, and then the South Miami basins. We have a Mike Hydro model that covers each of those planning focus areas and will allow us to do evaluations focused in those planning reaches. All right, next slide. All right, so as we saw, the project area covers the southern part of Palm Beach, Broward, and Miami-Dade counties. And we really focused in on the coastal control structures, those that provide flood risk management as well as salinity control, kind of that interface between the inland and the coastal areas. Those who were with us from the beginning, though, we started with a little bit larger scope, looking at things like storage and operational changes, and have really narrowed in our focus on those coastal control structures to allow us to look at the infrastructure needs to deal with climate change and urbanization, which relates to land use changes within this region over the last 70+ years. One of the challenges in this area, just so everybody is tracking, is that it does lie right at that interface with inland and coastal flood risk drivers. So that is one of the things we are looking at under this study, is how that flood waters interact with coastal waters, so dealing with sea level rise, tidal effects, as well as different intensities of rainfall. All right, next slide. All right, just a kind of overview of where we are in the schedule and kind of what we have coming up, because I think it's important to understand what are the next steps to really understand how what we're doing today and tomorrow fit into our overall process. So as I mentioned, we started off back at the end of September in 2022, held our scoping meetings in January of last year. Been working with the PDT and stakeholders since then to really refine our scope, gather information on performance metrics, and move towards the point where we can start our evaluations. As you may recall, when we talked last, we're getting ready for what we call a vertical team alignment meeting, which is essentially where we try to reach alignment on our scope, our schedule, and our budget for this study. We had submitted a proposed scope, schedule, and budget and reviewed that with our team at headquarters at the beginning of January of this year. That scope was looking at approximately 18 locations along the coast, modeling alternatives for those, and then carrying forward 4 specific locations in detailed design, while the other ones would be moved forward in a more conceptual design. One of our requirements is that we have to have a sufficient level of design to inform our cost, so that we have a lower risk of a cost overrun once we get into the construction phase. So our proposed scope and budget of $19.3 million and a study schedule lasting around 6 years would take us into a 2028 timeframe for an authorization. We were asked in January to kind of take a look at that due to the large cost of the study. Part of the reason for that is our folks at headquarters are making a decision on study scopes for projects all across the country, and we have somewhat of a limited budget to do all of the work that we're being asked by Congress to do across the country. So they're taking a hard look at where that kind of limited pot for feasibility studies is being spent. So we've been asked to take another look at the scope, and that's where we are right now. So the process moving forward will allow us to look at kind of priority locations within our study areas, as well as determine a path forward for the other locations, which we don't go into that detailed level of design. So that said, our schedule has us starting with this workshop today and tomorrow. We're looking to refine and finalize our performance evaluation criteria, our performance metrics, and then utilize those metrics to evaluate our future without project model results. So our plan will be to roll out those model results, including things like flows, stages, flood mapping, within these reaches in the early April timeframe. So the intent will be to come back to you all to talk about the model data, go through that in detail with you, and then give you all some time to work with that data and do your own evaluations for the locations which you're interested in, for the things that you're interested in. And then we'll meet again at the end of May to go through our team's evaluations using the metrics which we'll finalize with you over the next couple of days. And then also hear from you on your evaluations and the things that you found from the model data. Then we'll work together, utilizing all this evaluation information to really determine what our priority locations will be, and we'll strategize with the Water Management District and our other local stakeholders to understand what the final scope will look like. We'll revise our VTAM, or Vertical Team Alignment Memorandum, and resubmit that through our South Atlantic Division office in Atlanta, back to headquarters in the July-August timeframe for reconsideration. So what we're doing here over the next couple of days is really important to help us get to the final evaluation criteria, how we're going to look at this data, and will really help us in the near term and how we prioritize those areas that we need to take to the detailed level of design and focus on in our scope. I think that covers it from the project overview perspective, so I'll turn it back over to Gustavo.
Yeah, thank you, Tim. Next, we have Mrs. Amanda Bredesen, the Water Resources Technical Lead from the Army Corps. Amanda.
Thank you, Gustavo. Good afternoon, everyone. As Gustavo said, I'm Amanda Bredesen. I'm the lead H&H engineer from the Corps of Engineers. Today, I'll be briefly covering the H&H modeling effort, specifically the selected modeling tool, the input data and assumptions, as well as any potential model output that may be useful in supporting the analysis of the performance metrics that we discussed today. So I'll just kind of go through refamiliarization, possibly for most of the folks online. The modeling tool we selected was the coupled Mike Hydro model by DHI, and that was used for both our baseline and future with and without project models. Those domains were built to represent each one of our 4 planning reaches that Tim kind of covered a bit earlier. So the original model builds were from the South Florida Water Management District flood protection level of service and the Broward resiliency effort. However, we did make quite a few large modifications, including expanding the model down to the coast and other minor refinements needed to meet the specific needs for this study. So on this slide, kind of cover a few of the key model capabilities, including being able to simulate at a sub-regional scale while balancing model accuracy, model run times, and details, such as including the necessary H&H information for the secondary and tertiary canal network. Mike Hydro also has the capability to link 1D channel hydraulics to a spatially distributed and integrated hydrologic model, as well as to a 3D groundwater model. Finally, it has the flexibility to simulate different boundary conditions, such as a surge boundary condition for specifically for this study, and can incorporate and simulate complex structure components such as gate operations and rules. Next slide, please. So what I'd like to emphasize on this slide is that the model is being simulated for flood risk management. So that means we are simulating design storm events. It is not being simulated as a long-term period of record model. The duration for the simulations were about 4 weeks. So we are able to capture both the peak flooding depth from the design event as well as the flood duration, which, again, can be useful in assessment of some of the performance metrics that we discussed today. The design rainfall event was derived from the NOAA Atlas 14 and was spatially distributed across the model domain. We did use a 72-hour temporal distribution as published in South Florida Water Management District's Environmental Resource Permit Applicant Handbook. And the coastal boundary condition was obtained from the Coastal Hazard System, which was computed as part of the South Atlantic Coastal Study. And we basically used coastal hydrographs as the input to the downstream boundary condition in the Mike model. And the CHS data provides us an annual exceedance frequency-based result for a still water level, which does include both a surge and tidal component. So that is what we used, again, as the coastal boundary for the Mike model. Slide, please. So in order for us to characterize the flood risk and uncertainty, both from a planning and design perspective, the team has simulated compound flooding events to determine the total water level within the project area. So the objective for our compound flooding design event selection is to support flood risk management plan formulation, as well as be able to characterize the residual risk and uncertainty due to the coastal forcings within our project. So the events that were simulated for the baseline and future without project condition and in the future for the future with project condition are actually shown in this table on the side, and include a variable rainfall return frequency from a 5-year to a 500-year event, coupled with the coastal water levels that are shown in this table. Joint probability analysis is currently ongoing and will assist the team in identifying the appropriate return period for each one of these compound flooding events. In addition to the coastal surge water level, the direct and indirect effects of sea level change will also be assessed in the future with and without project condition. The nearest compliant tidal gauge is the Vaca Key gauge, shown on the figure at the bottom right, and that will be used to estimate the relative sea level change rate that is applied to those future conditions. The future without project model runs have been simulated under all 3 curves, so the low, intermediate, and high sea level rise scenario. And in the future, the recommended plan will also be simulated under all 3 sea level rise scenarios to help determine the overall project performance and the potential adaptation measures that we would recommend for the project. Slide, please. I do want to cover briefly where the modeling team is currently at with the model development and the simulations that have been performed. All 4 model reaches have been calibrated, validated, and undergone extensive internal quality assurance review. Each model has been simulated for our baseline condition, which is the 2035 year, as well as for the future without project condition, for the low, intermediate, and high sea level change scenarios. Currently, teams actively working on post-processing that data to produce an output such as the depth raster that you see as provided as an example to the right. And because of the robustness of the mic tools, there are multiple types of output that are available for review, which can the performance metrics, as well as facilitate, this team's understanding of the H&H response of the system. So, that includes things like depth and water surface elevation results for both the peak or maximum value, or time series hydrograph for the depth or water surface elevation results. Results can be computed for parameters such as flow, velocity, groundwater elevations, peak profiles within the canals, canal hydrographs, both in like a discharge and stage output can be provided. And finally, things like structure, flow, time series, both from a peak and average standpoint, things like headwater and tailwater elevations, gate operations, all of those types of detailed output can be provided. So in closing, I'd really like this team to begin conceptualizing which output that they would find the most useful to help further this team's understanding of the H&H results and the response from the models. And as mentioned earlier, we plan to present this data in another mini workshop in the early April timeframe. So I would really like this team to begin thinking about that. If you have recommendations or requests in mind, we do have a email address that will be presented on I think the very last slide of this presentation, but I'm going to go ahead and place it in the chat for your use. So please, again, reach out, email us with that recommendation so we can have the best workshop we can in early April. Thank you, and I'll turn it back over to Gustavo.
Thank you, Amanda. Okay, during the next slide, we are going over the planning process and go over again some of our accounts and policy, just to refresh the mind of all of us, the stakeholders and the public, and that we need to follow our processes in the Army Corps of Engineers. Next slide, please. This slide is just to show the 6 steps of the planning process, for the risk-informed planning process that we follow in the Army Corps. We have showed this multiple times during the past year and multiple iterations that we have with you. What I like this graph is the center part of the graph is the sponsor, stakeholder, vertical team, and involvement. Your input is critical for success, to have a success project, and that's why we are here. Tomorrow we'll be asking for your input in these performance metrics, draft performance metrics, and all the information that you have, as Carolina mentioned, your creativity is important. So that we'll be discussing tomorrow in our breakout sections. So again, we need to follow our process. Sometimes it's not easy to follow, but we are here for you to guide the team through that planning process and follow the steps that are required by our policy. Next slide, please. So in plan formulation, we have an objective. This is the objective of this study. It's a flood risk management study, but also include resiliency, right? We see in the screen also change conditions. That change conditions include coastal processes, tidal, coastal storm, and this study is focused on flood risk management, but however, we are looking also for residual risk for both coastal and residual riverine flooding. We are considering that as part of the study. And just keep in mind the policy, and when we formulate our alternatives, we need to keep in mind this objective during all the process of the planning process. Next slide, please. Again, this is the 6 steps for our planning process. What I have here is that word criteria, and that's what we will just establish that performance metrics criteria to formulate, evaluate, compare, and at the end of our process, select a plan. So that criteria is important part of our planning process on all the steps. And your input again is key for have a successful project. We start with management measure. We are going to formulate alternatives, have an initial rate of alternatives, a final rate of alternatives, and at the end of the process, we are going to select a tentative selected plan or TSP. But through that process, we need to have a criteria, and that's when performance metrics, we are going to support that process. Next slide, please. So this is an example of the traditional way that we evaluate alternatives, plans. If we don't do anything, that's the future with no action, what we call the future without. We'll be having more flood damages. What you see to the left of the graph is that damages will be increasing in the future years. So what we do is compare different plans, how these plans perform in the future when we implement these plans, how they compare in providing improvement to the flood risk damages. So just to keep in mind this, the performance metrics that we are going to discuss during today and tomorrow will help to support that evaluation in comparison to different plans that we will have. This example, we will have a kind of annualized damages. We can monetize that, but for other accounts, we are going to see some other slides in the presentation, it can be also qualitative, though that's something that we need to discuss and we need your input in how we support the development of the performance metrics for this study. Next slide, please. I have here my notes, policy, right? So it's important to understand that we need to follow our policy process, and as part of the policy process, each alternative plan will be formulated considering the 4 criteria that you see at the top of the slide: completeness, effectiveness, efficiency, and acceptability. All is tied to the objective and also to the cost effective of our alternatives. So just keep in mind that we need to follow our process. If we have a strong set of alternatives, we need to link this to our 4 criteria in the Army Corps. Our leadership and vertical team is going to evaluate our plans based on these criteria. So just keep this in mind. We need to tie the alternatives that we are going to develop to these 4 criteria. The 4 accounts for the comprehensive system accounts, the national economic development, the regional economic development, the environmental quality and other social effects that you see at the bottom of the slide. These are accounts established to facilitate evaluation for all plans. The national economic development, our econ team is going to talk about this in the next slides, but that's required by policy. The next accounts, the RED, EQ, and OSC, that's what we will discuss today and tomorrow, these 3 accounts. So it's important, as Tiffany mentioned, to account for comprehensive view of the benefits for the study. Next slide, please. Amanda mentioned this in her presentation, and some of the modeling output that we have. We need to keep in mind what data available we have as we complete the hydrology and hydraulic modeling, right? We have our evaluation strategy for the plans. We will have outputs from MIC, as Amanda mentioned, and the objective of this study is to reduce flood damages. Our econ team has been working with on the FDA for the economic analysis. We will have the structural damages, vehicle damages, in evacuation to account for the NED account, the National Economic Development account. And we do have a cost-effective plan, right? But also, we need to include the total benefits for the 3 accounts that previously mentioned, RED, EQ, and OSC. So that discussion is something that we need to have that discussion with the stakeholders and the public. And again, these accounts can be qualitative or quantitative. So that depends on the data that we have available, either from the model output or from data that is available in your region or the study area. So that's what we need to know and we need to discuss with during these workshops. Next slide, please, Lily. That's all what I have. And next, I have Eric Anamiek, or lead economics for the study. Eric.
Yep, thanks, Gustavo. All right, everybody. Eric Adamick, like Gustavo mentioned, I'm the lead economist from the Jacksonville district. So I'm just going to kind of walk us through the 4 accounts, how we use them in the evaluation, and provide some examples from existing studies that we have either ongoing or completed within the district. So one key important thing that we've had recently come out is a new policy directive, and there's an important change that we have to our approach. The Army Corps of Engineers has always had these 4 accounts, and we've always done evaluations within them in our studies. But one thing that's new, given this new policy directive, and that I want to highlight on this slide, is on the right-hand side there. The mandatory alternatives carried forward to the final array. And then item number 2 is a plan that maximizes net total benefits across all benefit categories. So that's what we're talking about when we refer to these 4 accounts. And I'll go and explain a little bit more about what the 4 accounts are. But key here is that we need to, in the final array, demonstrate a plan that maximizes net total benefit across all benefit categories. Typically in the past, we've highlighted the plan that maximizes net benefits consistent with the study purpose, the NED plan. That's item number 3. But not always have we shown and displayed a plan that maximizes net total benefits across all 4 categories. So that is new. Next slide, please. And so what are we talking about when we have the 4 accounts? Gustavo touched on these briefly already. The NED account, this is any sort of changes in the economic value of the national output of goods and services. Typically, this is something that we monetize, and I'll have examples on the next slide. But so it's just changes in the national output of goods and services. For the RED account, this is obviously more regional. It's changes in the distribution of regional economic activity, things like income and job creation. Environmental quality, this touches on the non-monetary effects of the ecological, cultural, and aesthetic resources. And, we include in this account positive and adverse effects of any of our plans that we or alternatives that we are recommending. The other social effects, or OSE account, is the effects on social aspects such as community impacts, health and safety, displacement, energy conservation, and various other metrics that can't be captured in the other 3 accounts. Next slide, please. So here again, we just have some examples. I touched on some of these, but NED, damages prevented, that's something most people are familiar with out of the Corps. This is, if a structure or a house is damaged in the future without project condition, and an alternative prevents that damage, that is a benefit from the alternative, and we record that as a dollar savings. And some of the other ones are transportation cost savings, emergency cleanup reduction, recreation benefits, and also agricultural losses fall under the NED account as well. Within the RED account, the Regional Economic Development account, things like jobs and wages created or supported. If you lose jobs in the future without project condition, but maintain those jobs with an alternative, that's registered. Local tax revenue, business revenue, things like that. Other social effects, OSE. One major one the Corps does is, life safety, record impacts to or risk to life loss. Things like cost of living, community cohesion. And for the EQ account, a lot of people in South Florida are probably very familiar with this particular unit of measurement, habitat units. But we can also do things like acres restored. We also want to measure things like cultural resource risk or loss, critical habitats, and things of that nature. Next slide. And real quick, just want to highlight before head back. Yeah, these are just examples too. I want to highlight. It's not Not all of them are possible to measure within every study scope, and there may be other ones that are critical maybe to this study, but these are just examples that we're given. Next slide, please. Okay, and so we have the 4 accounts. We have certain ways in which are certain metrics that we're going to identify, and then how do we measure these? So we have 4 options here. You can fully quantify, you can semi-quantitatively analyze, categorical, or fully qualitative. And the reason why this is important is I think when we have a tendency to really want to quantify all impacts, and then further sometimes there's a little bit of a drive to always monetize things as well. But what can get lost there is if you don't quite have all of the data to be able to capture those monetized effects or quantified effects, then you can miss out on some important metrics and ways to represent either adverse or positive impacts that an alternative or a plan might have. So it's important to keep in mind that we have these other ways of demonstrating performance metrics like categorical or qualitative. And I think this is very important for this study and a lot of the other ones within the core. And I'll actually have a couple of examples when I show the examples in the next few slides. Next slide, please. So one very quick example we have is the Indian River Lagoon South project. This is an aquatic ecosystem restoration plan. It had gone through a fairly, it had reached Chief's report, and it was desired that we come back and add a few more impacts from the other accounts based on this policy directive that we had. So we had habitat units. We showed the beneficial impacts some of these plans would have on the EQ account, but we wanted to know things like what about added benefits to tourism? Is there recreation benefits? How does it impact water supply? And some RED categories to capture. So I believe that's currently underway and being calculated. It may be complete. I'm not working on that project, so I'm not sure. But it's just an example of how we kind of went back and incorporated that policy directive. Next slide, please. And these next 2 examples that I have are from the same study, but I think it's an interesting case study to show a little bit of the different effects that measuring in the other accounts might have. So this is the Puerto Rico Coastal Feasibility Study. It first looked at the entire island of Puerto Rico. We narrowed it down to a couple of reaches. So we'll look here at Rincon on the west of the island, and then San Juan will be a second example. But basically, this particular reach did not have any economically justified alternatives. In fact, the recommended plan that we're moving forward with has a very low benefit to cost ratio around 0.1. But the team had developed a series of metrics that captured effects in the other accounts that we thought were very important. So, for example, one of the things that we looked at was on the left-hand side here, you can see where there's levels of risk to each of the structures. So those large dots show damages to structures. So you can see that there's like a large amount of risk to these structures along the coast, but the NED damages were not capturing the full effect. So what ended up happening is these structures get destroyed, they get left on the beach. So you have like huge houses basically falling into the beach. They don't get cleaned up. And what that does is that has another other social effect impact, right? You have a blighted condition. Tourists don't want to come to this beach. They don't, you lose spending in the local economy. Also, it has a negative impact on the local residents, right? They don't possess the means to move from the area. As you can see in the right-hand graphic, the percent below poverty, 38% is very high, percent low income, 75%. So these are people that are socially or economically disadvantaged, cannot move from the area. And then there are these structures left behind that create this blighted condition. So basically we weave this story in and we explain how the NED account doesn't capture the full telling of the story. And we were able to recommend a plan and get an NED waiver. Next slide, please. Similarly, in the San Juan area, we had a disadvantaged population as well. I know my graphic there on the bottom left is a little bit hard to see. It's kind of smaller, but key here is that a lot of the residents are in the 99th percentile of low income. So it was a pretty large EJ population. And then in the top left graphic there, you can see the levels of risk. And some of the highest risk, the red dots represent the highest risk. Many of those are located within the most disadvantaged communities. So that was one way that the team wanted to express that the NED benefits may not fully capture the impacts here. There was a large public housing system there that would get flooded, and our recommended plan reduced that flooding by 98%. And then a little bit different from Rincon, we also, this has a fairly vibrant commercial sector here. There's a lot of businesses within this area, and the team recorded over 7,000 days of business disruptions. And I think that that's really important too. As I was mentioning before, you know, there's a lot of times a drive to quantify everything. We didn't necessarily quantify the business revenue loss or monetize it, but we did say, well, look, these businesses are going to be out of service for 7,000 days in the future without project condition. And the recommended plan reduces that. So you can get an idea of how important and meaningful that is to the local community. Next slide, please. So some of our key takeaways here, we need to apply the Comprehensive Benefits Directive. And like I said, we need to carry forward you know, in the final array of plan that maximizes net benefits across all categories, as well as an NED plan, a plan that maximizes NED benefits. We have the means and a deep knowledge of how to do the NED analysis. Some of the other accounts, you know, we need to rely on some creativity and innovation. Definitely existing data is key here. And then importantly, as I mentioned in those prior two examples, we need to tell the full story. You need to explain how these metrics that fall into the other accounts, how they assist in going beyond the NED analysis. And of course, I like to highlight that last bullet point. Successful implementation also requires close coordination with the non-federal sponsor and affected communities. And that's why we're doing workshops like this one today. It's incredibly important to get feedback on you know, the metrics and ways we're going to evaluate these plans. And that's it.
Thank you, Eric.
Hi, everyone. My name is Del Kabesh, and I am the Environmental Justice Coordinator here in the Jacksonville District for the Army Corps of Engineers. So basically what environmental justice is, it's the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, and national origin or income, in the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. And we want to make sure that no group is bearing a disproportionate burden of the environmental risk and the environmental harm. So basically, we don't just push all the costs onto one group. And listed are a couple of the executive orders that we follow here at the Corps of Engineers. Next slide, please. There it is. So we like to work with our non-federal sponsors and local governments in coordination to make sure that we are abiding by these our environmental justice policies and making sure we involve these communities. In addition, there are several tribes that are in the South Florida region, and the Corps has a full-time tribal liaison, Cindy Thomas, and South Florida also has a full-time liaison, Armando Ramirez, who work closely with the tribes. So what I've been trying to do is I've been going on a project-by-project basis. Usually they're smaller in area than this project, and I reach out to local communities or local community leaders and try to involve them in that way. The challenge I have faced with this project, or that we've been facing with this project, is that this project exists over such a large geographic area. So it was really inefficient to try to go neighborhood by neighborhood. So what I've been trying to do my best at, is building relationships with the racial equality groups that exist within our project area and trying to build a relationship that way. And hopefully I've been doing somewhat of a good job involving them more so than we have in the past in our planning process here, so that their opinions and their thoughts and their suggestions are heard in a meaningful way. Next slide, please. So we use a couple of tools here at the Army Corps in order to identify neighborhoods or areas or census blocks that we should be considering for our environmental justice targeting. One of the tools we use is the EPA's environmental justice tool. And what it does is basically we can draw an area, we can go by census tracts, and we can look up summaries like the one you see here from Miami Springs, where it will tell us the demographic information, the racial breakdown, the income, and other things like, location of Superfund, proficiency or odds of flooding, and so on and so forth. And we can compare it to the state averages, and we can compare it to the national averages to see where they fall in that area. Next slide, please. And the official tool that we are required to use is called the CGES tool. It's just for identifying, again, communities that we would target for environmental justice considerations. And this one goes by census tract. This is an example, for example, from another project that I'm on for St. Augustine, where the Western Peninsula would be considered would be considered a community we target for environmental justice considerations. It shows us things like where this section falls in percentile form as far as like demographics, flood risk, and other factors to determine whether or not they should be considered. So while tools are important and it's a good starting point, the main thing for me is to actually go in and do research on these communities, to actually visit these communities, and to determine why we would consider them for EJ community and really get to know them well. And at least I've been trying to do my best at that too. And with that, we're going to go to the next slide, and Nicole is going to take over from there.
Thanks, Del. So, just like the Corps is, Del just shared here, they're also prioritizing projects and investments that go to disadvantaged communities. We at the district do that as well. And also the local communities and all of our stakeholders are doing this as well. Of course, we use different information. As he said, they're required to use one tool, but during the October meeting that we had last year, we shared a few tools, which is what I'll go through right now, that really provide different information and that have a different application. But they're publicly available, they're compatible with GIS, and they can be used as they are. They can be used by being assigned weights to maybe a category that's more important to a specific group. And of course, what we aim to do here is they can be used together with the information that we know locally about the communities that we serve. And all of this really depends on, again, what you need it for, right? Like, is it just for prioritization, which is initially how we started using it? Is it for grant applications? When we're looking to partner with certain people, that's when that information becomes really helpful. So in addition to EJ Screen, which is the EPA tool, I know at this point, many of us are familiar with the CDC SVI tool. And this is one that really just provides demographic and economic information and then ranks vulnerability of those communities. As Del mentioned, one of the biggest issues is, the project footprint is really large. And then I'm from Miami. Being from Miami, we all know that, you can kind of classify a lot of areas and a lot of groups in the same way. So it's really important to have additional information. Next slide, please, Jenny. Thanks. So in that same vein of having additional information, we have another tool, which is the other one that Del just mentioned, the Climate and Economic Justice Screening tool. So this one, it looks at socioeconomic data, so social stuff, demographic information, but it also overlays that information with very specific categories of environmental, historical, and community data that's available through a variety of sources. This one actually, we have in our plan listed like all the sources the data is coming from, and it's over 30 sources. And then this one, instead of ranking vulnerability, what it really seeks to do is to identify the community as disadvantaged. So it's not ranking it in comparison to its neighbor. It's saying this community within this census tract is disadvantaged within one of these categories. And for this tool, being disadvantaged within one category is like automatic saying you're disadvantaged, period. And so this is a different use that we have here too, right? Because depending on what the ask or the need is, the statement that can be made is different. Next slide, please. And then the other tool that we discussed last time that we shared was the FEMA NRI tool. So this is another one that similarly looks at socioeconomic data. But in addition to that, instead of looking at environmental hazards, it actually looks at risk exposure, so like hazard exposure, and then community resilience data, which I think is really interesting because that's that piece of what are the resources that are available to a community at the moment of a disaster or before or after a disaster. So it goes a little further by looking, okay, you know, you have this data on the community itself, its social and economic standing, its demographic information. We know the risk that it faces based on this other risk exposure information. But in addition to that, what is available to them and what things will be impacted at the time of a risk. So that takes it to that further layer. So again, I think the important thing to note with these is that these are available. We all, we use them a lot for grants planning and prioritizing, but also they're very useful for when we try to think about how do we, for the performance metrics, look at the quantitative or the qualitative information that we need to bring that is more about our local communities within each of the project reaches. And that's my slide. Go ahead, Jenny.
Thank you, Nicole. So I will be presenting, talking about the last engagement that we have for the performance metrics. It was October last year, so thank you for the team that presented today. And there has been other team members working on these draft performance metrics during the past weeks, and I'm really glad to have this team working with me. And I will go over what the input that we received during our last engagement in our in-person meeting in October, and how we took that input and what was the input that we received, and what we have been doing with processing that information. During October workshop, we discussed the three accounts: the regional economic development, environmental quality, and other social effects. We have iteration also virtual, so we collect all that information, in-person information and virtual, and transform that in different kind of categories for these accounts. And next slide, please, Jenny. So the input that we have, we collect input from maps, your input website via virtual, and the team collect that information. We have been discussing that internally and also with the South Florida Water Management District, and try to get that input and transform that to performance metrics, draft performance metrics. So it's important to understand that we are going to discuss today and tomorrow is a draft performance metrics. What we are going to do is just prioritize some of these metrics. We are going to ask you to what is important for you. what is more important for you on each of these categories for the usage accounts. Important to understand that we are not going probably to we are not going to use all the metrics that we have. We wish that we can have time and resources to use all that metrics, but we need to prioritize what is more important for the stakeholders and the community in terms of the performance metrics. Next slide, please, Jenny. For the regional economic development, again, this, what you see on the screen, are no performance metrics. This is the input that we received during the workshop, what we heard from the public and stakeholders. They were concerned about loss of wages, loss of income, people not able to go to work during flood events. And every time I see the news with in South Florida, I think last year we have a big event with so power went off, and I understand and the concern and that's the input that we received. People not able to go to the work because flooded roads, or public transportation affected. That's that was common in all the regions when we discussed the RED account. They were concerned about the business, monetary losses for business during the flood event or after the flood event. Business close and affect the business monetary. They have monetary losses, permanent loss of business, disruption of business. We heard about also agricultural impacts due to flooding events, and tax revenue. Loss of tax revenue is also associated with business. We will have business closed during flooding events, people not able to go to work. There were concerns about loss of tax revenue and how this is going to affect your community in the different counties that we are working with. Loss of property values. We heard about concerns about this due to the flooding events, loss of the property values in your community, inability to build back after the flooding event. That were concerns that we heard from last workshop. Some of these concerns, when we discussed with the team, were moved to the NED account. And probably we are going to explain that in more detail during future engagement. And some are related to the RED account, the Regional Economic Development, but the team has decided also to move some of them to the main National Economic Development account. Next slide, please, Jenny. Inability to build back after flooding, total losses of the properties. We heard that from the public. Also, we heard concerns about flood insurance, the increasing of flood insurance or the night of flood insurance in reduce of the coverage. That were concerns that we heard during the last workshop. Transportation impact, flooding roads, airport impacts, by Port Everglades flooding. We have that, Broward had that flood event, or rainfall event that broke records on April last year. So we had concerns about that. That was kind of in the mind of the stakeholders and public when we engaged with this discussion. So that's concerns that we heard during the workshop. Again, these are no performance metrics. That's what we heard. And we are going to discuss later on in this, during this afternoon, how the team transformed this, what we heard, into performance metrics, just to meet our policy requirements, and what, and also based on the limitations that we have in terms of the hydrology and hydraulic modeling data that we have. So all what we heard, all the tools that we have to evaluate or flooding events, all the data available that we have, that needs to be tied to develop these performance metrics. And important, if we are missing something or you have data available, that's what we need to hear from you in the next day when we have engagement with you for this workshop. Slide, Jenny. For the environmental quality account, we heard concern about flood indoor pollution, wildlife fragmentation due to the hydraulic structures, future permanent flooding, impact to manatee habitat, also water supply impacts, utilities, impact on private wells, impact to agricultural and flooding and septic tanks. This was what we heard from during the meetings, either in person or virtual in last October, and understanding that for the environmental quality, we have a limitation on the tools that we are going to use. It was mentioned that we will have flooding depths, flood durations, but in terms of the water quality, we need to have creativity to how to develop these performance metrics. And again, we need to prioritize in understanding that this study is a flood risk management study, but the environmental quality also will be part of the evaluation and comparison of the plans, but keep in mind that our study is a flood risk management study, and we have limitations in terms of the water quality or data that we have for this study. Slide, please. For the other social effects, we heard concerns about impact on subsistence hunting and also fishing and public health. We heard about mosquito control, impacts on that cause, increasing that cause. And again, we heard, this is what we heard, but during this past week, the past month, we have been working, development, these performance metrics, trying to understand your input in trying to develop these performance metrics or draft performance metrics based on what the stakeholders, what we heard from the stakeholders. We will have this discussion tomorrow, and today we will be presenting how we interpret that data and transform that into this draft performance metric. Slide, please, Jenny. So what we need from you is the website, in South Florida Water Management District website, we upload kind of read-ahead material. So what we need from you for tomorrow engagement is to think about how to tie these performance metrics to the objective of the study and how we can tie these metrics or flood risk management study, but also how to tie these metrics to resiliency, what is part of the study objective. Think about that, and that will help our team to support the metric when we are going to engage with our vertical team and support our storytelling on how these metrics will be useful or will be supporting our analysis of the study or plans. And the second bullet is important to understand that all the performance metrics that we are going to discuss today and tomorrow needs to have the ability to distinguish between alternatives. We are going to compare different alternatives, different plans for the study area. So these alternatives will support that comparison or evaluation of different different alternatives. But it's important to understand that as I showed in the previous slides, metrics, criteria, right? We need to have that criteria to evaluate different alternatives. If that's how we are going to use these metrics to develop that criteria. Data available. You know, you are the experts in the area. We are guiding you to this process, but you live there. You know what data is available. We need to hear that. Please leave some data suggestion and specific data sources that you have for best knowledge to support metrics. And that's what we need to discuss and hear from you during tomorrow engagement. Also, what will be the level or effort for our team to implement these metrics? It's important to keep that in mind. We wish that we have all the time in the world to implement or to evaluate these metrics, but we have limits in terms of the resources and time. So we need to be effective in the use of the performance metrics that we are going to select. How these metrics add value to the decision making is also important is for what we want. We need to prioritize these metrics. We need to hear from you what is more important for you. What of these metrics you value the most? And we will have a list of metrics, and we will want to rank these metrics in which one is more important for you for each of the accounts that we are discussing during this workshop. It's very important to have that ranking for all teams and hear from you what is more important, what is more valuable for you. And I think that's all what I have for these slides. I think we are a little bit ahead of time. And but again, you have this attached sheets of read ahead material in the website. So please take a look to some of that read ahead and think about some of these bullets, and that's what we want to discuss tomorrow. We have a good discussion with you during the breakout sections for each of the reaches that we are going to have tomorrow. And that being said, I think we are going to have probably, we can go back to 225.
225?
Yes, let's take a break and we go back to 225.
All right.
Thank you. Hey, Jenny, you're back. Jenny?
I'm here.
Yeah, just go to the next slide, please.
Sure thing.
Welcome back from break. Hopefully we had some coffee. Belle is having coffee. And yes, next we are going to discuss the draft metrics. The team has been developed and I mentioned, really glad to have a great team working in this study. What you are going to see this afternoon is Center for during the past weeks, months, and we have been working diligently with the South Florida Water Management District or economic team or environmental team, having good discussions, but more important, these are drafts, right? And we want to hear from your input during tomorrow's meeting. So that being said, next slide, please, Jenny. I'll give that to Kenneth Cao, or economist.
Hey everyone, my name's Kenneth. I'm one of the economists on this project right now, and I'm going to be covering our draft performance metrics for the Regional Economic Development Account. Right now, we have 5 in our draft array: loss of income, local business revenue, tax revenue, construction expenditure impacts, and recreational activity impacts. And we're going to delve into each and one of them right now. Next slide. Oh. Okay, so for our first one, we have loss of income, and what this is simply put, the inability for people to work during flood events. So if it floods, people can't get to work, that's work they can't do. If people work an hourly job, they can't clock in, and that's lost income for them. And ways we can think of it is just the time that a business is down, or even the amount of days that it's down, is one way that we can quantify this. And the way that we're going to evaluate it is we want to take a look at the business disruptions due to flooding and obviously the duration of it that causes the inability for people to be able to work. And the idea is that we can create a solution that can reduce the amount of business disruptions and allows people to get back to work. Next slide, please. Second one is going to be business revenue, and this is the monetary losses to businesses due to disruptions caused by flooding. And we can take a look at this by looking at business revenue impact. So if there is a business, they're down from flooding and they can't operate, that's business they don't have, and that's a regional loss. And we want to find a solution that could reduce business disruption and the monetary losses with solution. And with these draft performance metrics, I just wanted to stress that in our comment section, we have the link that Amanda put in the chat that you could email things to. If you guys have any sort of information that is relevant to these things, let's say that you know a business that is impacted by flooding, or you are even a business owner of a business that gets impacted by flooding, the more information that we have, the better. So I'm asking you guys, if you have the sort of information that can be helpful to us, you can send it to that email in the chat. Next slide, please. All right, number 3 is going to be tax revenue, specifically county tax revenue from losses from business disruption caused by flooding. So the idea is that if you have a business and their revenue is impacted by flooding, they're making less money, then that's potentially less revenue for the county, and it's a regional impact. And of course, we want to evaluate it by taking a look at the losses due to business disruptions caused by flooding, and see if we can reduce this loss with a flood risk management solution. Next slide, please. All right, and this one, number 4, is going to be construction expenditure impacts. And for this, we're going to be taking a look at how the construction expenditures from the project just impacts the regional economy, right? So if we come and we're building a project in the area, the workforce there, the construction workers there, they're spending money. They're spending money at local businesses. And we want to take a look at how those expenditures impact the regional economy. And we have our own set of tools that we can use to assess that. Next slide. And finally, we're on to recreational activities. And the idea behind this is we want to take a look at disruptions to any sort of recreational activities caused by flooding. So if people like to do anything, let's say in a green area of park, and that park is getting flooded, that's a recreational effect from flooding. And that's something that we want to look to reduce potentially, and that's how we would evaluate it as well. And that's it.
Okay, thank you, Kenneth. Next, I have Ken Bradshaw. He is the chief of the South Florida section for environmental branch with the Army Corps of Engineers. Ken will be presenting the environmental quality draft performance metrics. Ken.
Thank you, Gustavo. Just quick mic check. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Hey, good afternoon. As Gustavo said, my name is Ken Bradshaw. I'm in the environmental branch, chief of the South Florida section. And so the draft performance metrics that we're going to cover for environmental quality touch on some of the public comments and concerns that Gustavo mentioned earlier. And those are flooding, water supply impacts, particularly due to salinity, flooding of septic systems, wildlife mobility and habitat fragmentation, impacts to commercial and municipal waste fields, and finally impacts to industrial facilities. And so we'll just briefly go through what each one of these represents. Next slide, please. Okay, so the first one is environmental resource loss due to permanent future flooding. And this would evaluate natural areas that become permanently inundated due to sea level changes or changes in the groundwater levels. Some of the ways that we can measure this would be through acreages of areas that are likely subject to permanent inundation. And the way we would look at this is a negative impact would be something that becomes inundated more often through either sea level change or groundwater changes. And a positive evaluation of this would be improving or reducing the amount of area that's permanently inundated due to sea level changes or groundwater. And so the data, as you think about tomorrow, think about some of the data that might be available in the different regions that could be used to look at these natural areas that could be inundated due to permanent flooding. Next slide. So the next slide, or the next performance metric is water supply impacts due to salinity intrusion. And this metric in particular would look at saltwater intrusion into the water supply. So one of the things we're looking for here is some input on how we could measure this performance measure either qualitatively or quantitatively. We do know that the models that have been selected for the project do not have salinity indicators as outputs, and so it'd be difficult to have any kind of quantitative modeling of it. But as we do our evaluation, we can look at qualitative measures such as the location of groundwater irrigation wells in relation to where we would expect salinity intrusion. So again, as you look into data that you have for the study, think about how that data could be used to look at water supply and salinity intrusion impacts. Next slide, please. The third one is flooding of septic systems, and this performance metric gets at the impact to the environment through pollution that's generated from the septic systems being impacted by flood events. And so we're looking at, again, increases in groundwater levels or floods and where those septic systems would be within the different regions. And one of the ways we can measure this is just looking at the number and location of the septic tanks that are in the area. There's probably data about where septic systems have been mapped in the system, and we could look at, are we increasing or decreasing the number of those, and that's how we would evaluate that metric. Next slide, please. So this is the performance metric that we have that solely focused on wildlife. And so one of the concerns that was brought up was whether or not wildlife would have restricted mobility or access or fragmentation due to either replacing structures or relocating structures in the system. And again, there's really not a model way to look at this one, so we think it will be a qualitative measure. What we want to know things like, how would, for example, manatees be impacted? Would the location of a structure be cause them to not be able to access a certain place or cut them off from different habitat or food sources? And so that's the kind of information and data we're looking for under this performance metric. Next slide. Okay, the final two slides are looking at, again, waste field systems. So PM6 is actually looking at municipal and commercial waste fields. So we're talking about things like, where are the sewer systems and how flooding might impact those. And so we would want to know whether there are increases or decreases in the frequency or duration of flooding of those systems. So a negative impact would be more flooding or more systems impacted, and a positive impact would be improved risk management and reduction of those systems. And again, so this is commercial and municipal. And then finally, on the next slide is the industrial. Next slide, please. Sorry. The industrial facilities, and it's the same kind of measure, but just looking at an industrial facility because of the different types of pollution that will be associated with that type of facility. So in the different regions, we'd look at impacts to industrial facilities due to flooding, and measuring whether or not there are increases or decreases in the flooding frequency or flood risk of these facilities. And that's the final of the environmental quality metrics.
Thank you, Ken. Next, I have Bill.
Hi, everyone. Pulling double duty today also as an economist. We're going to be going over the other social effects accounts. As the first Ken said, if you think of anything to add, or if you have anything to add to these comments, please please send something to the email. Amanda Bredesen dropped it in the chat earlier. If you have anything you feel is valuable, anything that you think will help us with our study, make it more robust, more accurate, please send it to us. Next slide, please. I'm going to go over the metrics that we're using. Physical health, the limited access to hospitals, community identity, life safety, and cultural resources. Next slide, please. Our physical health, we have limited access to hospitals. So when flooding occurs, there are less roads to use. It makes getting to hospitals and healthcare facilities more difficult. And what we want to measure is decreasing flooding to roads that provide access to healthcare facilities. Obviously, flooding impacts roads, and if it's floods, you can't get there. An improvement in this area is, less flooding, you're able to get to healthcare facilities when you need any kind of treatments or any kind of procedures. Next slide, please. Community identity. So flooding impacts to community and or historic resources. Same idea, decreased flooding to these areas, because flooding will impact these areas, and improving our structures and decreasing the flooding will have positive impacts to the community and historic resources. Next slide, please. Life safety. So, flooding is a dangerous activity and, puts people in danger. And hopefully when by reducing the amount of flooding that occurs due to rainfall events or sea level rise, we can keep people safer. This is our most noble goal here. Next slide, please. And then our final one is cultural resources. Same idea with community identity. Flooding will impact the access to cultural resources. And we're looking to ways to improve that metric. That's my last slide, but as I said before, if you think of anything else, or if you think of anything that will add to make our study more robust, please send it to the chat, the email in the chat. Thank you all very much, and I'm going to give it back to Gustavo.
Yes. All right, thank you. So, yeah, thank you to the team. I think we are early with the discussion of the metrics. And again, you see in the chat, Nicole Cortez dropped the website for the South Florida Water Management District with the read-ahead material for discussion tomorrow. The goal for today was to present these draft metrics to you for the RED, EQ, and OSC accounts. For tomorrow, and we will have an iteration with the PDT. We will have breakout sections for each of the reaches that was represented for the study area, reach A, B, C, and D. We will have additional instructions tomorrow, and we will have a Zoom meeting to discuss for each of these performance metrics. So for tomorrow, we will have a more engagement with the PDT. There will be periods at the end for public comments, understanding that we need to follow our policies. So the last 15 minutes of the discussion for the each of the accounts we will be receiving public comments. Please take a look to the read-ahead material for the draft performance metrics that we have presented today for the regional economic development, environmental quality, and other social accounts. And please bring your ideas. We need creativity. Share with us what kind of data is available or out there to support our metrics. And some of these metrics, as I presented early, some of them are the input that we received. Some of these metrics will be accounted in the NED account, National Economic Development account, and some are we include in these three accounts, RED, EQ, and OSC. And you saw probably some new ones, including life safety. That one, we didn't receive any comment during the past workshop in October for life safety. That one, we include that is per policy. We need to evaluate life safety as part of the performance metrics. And additional, some of the ones that presented in EQ, we add that during the discussions with the team. And again, tomorrow, I'm looking forward to have a more iterative engagement. And please feel free to provide your input when we are going to discuss the metrics tomorrow. We want to hear from you. And if you cannot participate in tomorrow's meeting, please send your feedback using the email that we will be providing. It was provided in the chat, but we will provide it at the end of this meeting. And again, this is a team effort. What we are presenting today, the faces that you see today is just part of the team. We have a lot of people working on this weekly engagement to discuss this, because we want this to be a successful project. And keep in mind our limitations or constraints in terms of the data that we have available. And again, prioritize the metrics. We need to hear what is important for you, what matters the most for you, what for the flood risk management study, and also to add resiliency to our system, right? You are the ones that live there day by day. We are providing guidance to accomplish with our policy and follow our policy process, but we want to hear from you your ideas, and that's the goal for tomorrow. And that's, I think I have Mr. Tim Geisen with closing remarks and Jenny with the agenda for tomorrow. Tim.
Great. Hey, thanks, Gustavo. Really appreciate everybody's time this afternoon, and to all of our presenters. And it's a lot of information to take in, so I really encourage everybody to go to the South Florida Water Management District website and the link that Nicole put in the chat, and download the materials to give yourself a chance to review. A couple of things I want to remind everybody, going back to Amanda's presentation on the model results. I think it's going to be really important for you all to think about what data from the models, what stage flow mapping, things like that, all of the items that Amanda listed that we can pull from the models, what would be most useful for you individually as you're looking at impacts to the system from different flood events. And make sure you get in touch with us through the email address and provide that feedback to Amanda. That way the modeling team can have the data parsed out in ways that you want to see it, making it as easy as possible for you all to look at it when we do release that next month. And then, of course, with the performance metrics, I know sometimes it's hard to maybe visualize some of your feedback until you have that model result and you can actually see areas that are being impacted. So we understand that how it can sometimes be difficult. So we fully expect that you may have ideas that pop in your heads once you see model data as well. So don't worry if that is the case. But whatever you have as far as known effects, especially those specific to local communities that maybe aren't part of an existing database somewhere, or economic data that your city or municipality may have, is extremely useful. So all of that information would be much appreciated. And then, of course, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, be thinking also about how you want to do your evaluations, things that would be important to you to look at for your specific community or area that you work in, and how you would provide some of those evaluations. Because I think in addition to just the feedback and the performance metrics that we can crunch through and use for evaluations, your own evaluations and your kind of qualitative assessments based on your own expertise are also really important as we get into further discussions. So there's a few things to think about as we move forward the next day and over the next couple months. I'll turn it over to Jenny to go over the agenda.
Thank you, Tim. So I had posted the agenda so folks can see it, but I wanted to make these two websites known, the district and the Army Corps website for the C&SF study. If everyone could review those read-ahead materials for tomorrow, just to kind of be familiar with discussion topics and how we're going to facilitate getting your input. Those read-ahead materials are available on the C&SF website for the district. And if you cannot get a hold of those or open those or need copies emailed to you, you can also go on that Resiliency website for the district and find the Resiliency email, and we can get a copy of those read-ahead material to you by email. That being said, I can put the slide back to the agenda, and we will start 8:30 a.m. tomorrow. We are going to do breakout sessions within this parent meeting, so you can choose your individual room. So if you're located in Reach A, you'll choose breakout session 1 within this parent meeting, and you'll be redirected to a smaller chat room where everyone can talk about RED for Reach A. So it's going to be a little different than we've done before, so bear with us if we have any technical difficulties. This is kind of a new thing we're trying, but I think we have a really good setup so everyone can talk about their specific reach and these specific topics. Any other questions before I adjourn, everyone?
Thank
You
you,
can raise your
Jenny.
hands. We can unmute you if need be.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. I think we ended early the discussion today, so we have 1 hour more to do your assignment, homework for today, to think about the read ahead material and provide that provide your input for discussion tomorrow. We'll be providing more instructions tomorrow morning, how to join the breakout sections. We will have our economists leading the discussion, and for the EQ account, also we have environmental team members supporting the discussion. Again, we want to, some of these performance metrics, we want to be creative and also understanding that we are not going to use all of them, but select what is more important to them, right? For you. And yeah, we have constraints in terms of the time and budget for the study, and keep in mind that, and also keep in mind that we need to tie the metrics to the study objective. That's a very important part of the planning process. And I don't have anything else. And,
I do not see any hands raised for questions.
all right. So thank you for the participation this afternoon. We ended early, and we'll be glad to have your input tomorrow. We will be fresh in the morning, so we have a lot of good energy tomorrow, and our team is very happy to support this and keep in mind what we discussed today. Thank you.